Hey TCC, as promised, this is a video kind of just preparing us for this next sermon series that's beginning this coming Sunday. We are going to be walking through Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Some of those are overlapping chronologically. And we're going to be hitting the high points in each one of these things. And the title of the sermon series is Walking with Wisdom. And so, first of all, we're going to spend a little bit of time giving the foundation, the biblical context of where we're at. But then we're going to kind of walk through a little bit of how do we understand the historical narrative, the stories that we're reading in the Old Testament. Because for a lot of us, how we heard it in kids' church and just growing up, it's hard to connect the Old Testament with the New Testament. And so we want to be able to provide some of this framework that's going to help us understand these things and understand the wisdom that God intends for us to gain from studying these. So a little background. First, in the fall of 2023, we went through the Torah series. There's a playlist. I'm going to put it on this video as well, or in the notes section there. You can find it on our YouTube channel or on the website, but we spent a few weeks kind of doing the same thing, but through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And what we found during that, and I'd encourage you can go back through and listen to them or watch them, and what we found in that is that we read all the way at the beginning of Genesis, right, that Adam and Eve are dwelling in the presence of God. They're in close proximity to Him until their rebellion. And what happens? They're removed from the garden. They're removed from the tree of life. There's this fractured relationship that now happens. And from a judicial perspective, they deserve death. But that's not what we read. Instead, we read in the Torah this pursuit of God. That God pursues His fallen humanity. And the relationship that they now have is different. It's changed because they have a sinful nature. And God is holy. And they can't dwell in His presence in the same way they did before they had a sinful nature. And so what we read in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy is this progressive drawing nearer that God does. And in fact, we read the beginning of this in that God tells Abraham what His plan is. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, He says, "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." That's a big statement, that all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And we're operating in about 2000 BC, 2400 or so BC. And so this is what God says, like there is a plan to bless all the nations of the earth through one nation, through one person initially, which is Abraham. And so He begins to rescue them, right? He rescues them. They end up finding themselves in Egypt due to a famine. God rescues them from Egypt, and they go into the desert, right? And God becomes their provider. He provides them with quail. He provides them with manna. He provides them with water. He provides them with organizational structure. And he tells them His name, Yahweh. And so there's this intimacy and He calls them His people. So there's this intimacy part that God starts to take them and provide for them. Now, remember, this is a long ways away from Genesis chapter 12, chronologically, right? They spent 400 years in Egypt. And so what we see is that God is calling them His people and providing for them and caring for them. But the relationship's still distant. He's in fire. He's in smoke. He's on the top of Mount Sinai with this restricted permissions for who could come up there, Moses and the elders. And that was it. Until we start to read in Exodus that He starts to draw closer. And he gives instructions for building the tent of meeting, which is now where God is going to come closer to them. And so they build this tent of meeting. It sits outside the camp. And we read in Leviticus the rules for approaching God. This is where we start talking about clean and unclean. And a lot of times this is misunderstood, often a lot from Christians, as this effort that God was trying to get them to be righteous. And if they had just followed all the rules, they would have been righteous. That was never really the purpose. It was they could temporarily be clean so that they could be in the presence of God. And that was like this little bit of closer, right? He was in this place, no longer up on this mountain, no longer in fire and smoke, but he dwelt behind the curtain. And some people, the great high priest, could go in once per year. And so there was this provision that they could draw even closer. And then we read in Numbers that tent of meeting comes into the middle of the camp. And so now all Israel is around, and God's in the midst of them, kind of. Not like it was in the garden, but close. And this is where they find themselves, on the threshold of entering into the land that God had promised to Abraham. Now, what we read in Deuteronomy chapter 30 is that he tells them about this land and this promise. And he says in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 5, "And the Lord your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, that you may possess it. And he will make you more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring." That's really important. "So that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live." That's a promise. He's going to do something. "And the Lord your God will put all these curses on your foes and enemies who persecute you, and you shall again obey the voice of the Lord and keep all his commandments that I command you today. The Lord your God will make you abundantly prosperous in all the work of your hand, in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your cattle, and in the fruit of your ground. For the Lord will again take delight in prospering you, as he took delight in your fathers, when you obey the voice of the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and his statutes that are written in this book of the law." That's the Torah. "When you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." This is the promise. This sounds great. Sounds amazing. This sounds like everything's going to be great. That sounds like the Garden of Eden all over again. But what does he mean by that, circumcising your heart, so that you will love the Lord? This had to have resonated in their minds of like, what does that mean? How does that work? Because what he then says after this in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 20, "For when I have brought them," Israel, "into the land flowing with milk and honey," that's the promised land, "which I swore to give to their fathers, and they have eaten and are full and grown fat, they will turn to other gods and serve them, and despise me and break my covenant." There's a forecast here. There's a prophecy. This is going to happen. Like, I'm going to have all these blessings for you, and this is going to happen. But before that happens, you're going to rebel against me. And you read in Deuteronomy 32, verse 43, "Rejoice with him, O heavens, bow down to him, all gods, for he avenges the blood of his children and takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him and cleanses his people's land." There's this future promise that this is all going to happen. And that's about what we're going to read. What does that all look like? How do they go from such an incredible promise of God and God's presence in their midst to this going after other gods? And then what does it look like that God's going to bring them back? What does it look like that he's going to circumcise their heart? This is going to take us from about 1446 BC until the 400 BC. And that's the timeline that we're going to spend. So this is the historical backdrop to where we're at when Joshua begins to take Israel into the promised land. So this is part one. I'll see you on the other ones.